Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Nice introduction to phylodynamics. Okay. However, I'll go a little bit more into detail of what phylodynamics is and why we're interested in it. There's mainly two things. One is, can we look at genetic or genomic data and find out things about epidemiology, find out birth and death rates and are not, which all the epidemiologists are interested in because they want to make predictions about epidemics and therefore inform decisions on how to deal with epidemics like influenza and others. The second thing is we don't only want to look at what we can learn from the genetic data about epidemiology, we also want to include the fact that epidemiological and evolutionary processes interact. They influence each other throughout the evolution and the population dynamics, and therefore we want to include them into our analysis. So first, for those who are not too familiar with epidemiology, the standard way to the standard way for epidemiologists to model a disease like influenza would be to put the host into compartments. The standard model for, say, influenza, because for influenza you get infected, you're first a susceptible individual, and then once you get infected, you'll be infected and infectious for a while, and at some point you'll recover and you're thrown into the recovered compartment because you can't get infected anymore. And this can be modeled by these mass action equations that assume that everyone in the population interacts as likely with anyone else in the population. And there's a problem with that. We don't really have the situation that everyone interacts as likely with everyone else, and there's lots of stochasticity in epidemics, which you can see here quite nicely. So these are simulations we did of an SIR model, and the solid lines are the number of infecteds over time. These are the number of susceptibles over time, and these are the numbers of recovereds. So we start with, say, a population of 1,000 or 100, and we say there's one infected individual at the very beginning, and then we let it take off. And for these four pictures here, the parameters are exactly the same. And still you can see quite different dynamics, especially in the beginning and at the end of the epidemic, but still even at the peak. However, this also depends on the population size. So here this is a quite small population size. Normally the main differences are at the beginning and at the end of an epidemic, because numbers of infecteds and susceptibles are small. Therefore, we prefer to use stochastic compartmental models, which can be described by master equations like this one. I only show it in order to point out that we're now looking at single events rather than a mass action. So the probability of a certain state of susceptible, infected and recovered individuals either increases through an infection where beta is the infection rate, or the decreases in the number of susceptibles. it's not a very pretty equation to explain, I guess. However, this whole term stands for the infection. This one is recovery, and here you've got also the likelihood that nothing happens in one time step. Now, I want to combine the two fields. I want to combine epidemiology and phylogenetics. So I'm going down to what are we actually looking at. So, this is what epidemiologists look at. They have their incidence data of infecteds, and this is what we are looking at in phylogenetics. We have a time tree, and in this case, I simulated a structured population just to give you an impression of what happens if you look at a number of populations. So now here I have 3 populations, blue, red and yellow, and I start in the blue one, and you can see how the infection, the epidemic takes off here, and at some point just before the peak in blue we have a migration event to the red population, so the epidemic takes off there, and then the same thing happens with the yellow. And this is one of the possible genealogies that belongs to that SIR history, which is not unique though, because when I built that tree, I know every single event that happened in the epidemic, because that's how I simulated. But still, when I'm going backward in time building the tree, and when I have a recovery event here or an infection event, I randomly choose A or 2 individuals in the concerning population to either coalesce or to recover. Now, this is what I call an SIR history or SIR trajectory, which I show now because that's what I try to sample in BEAST to combine SIR and phylogenetics. And those who are not too tired because the coffee break is coming up soon might see that I don't have single events here. I have more than one event in one step in this trajectory, which is because we decided to make an approximation to the single event version using tau leaping, just because it's just going to take too long if we sample in every single step. Every single event, we can make a Poisson approximation of the number of events happening. So this is one of the options I've listed here. You can either sample the entire history within BEAST, or you can sample a partial history and approximate the likelihood, which we're doing at the moment, or you can look at likelihood-free approaches. And we don't know what's the best way to go yet. We're just flying around with that one at the moment, and going to see how it works. So when I sample SIR trajectories, I I need to compute a likelihood for them, and the likelihood, as I just mentioned, is approximated by a Poisson distribution. And so I might already start drawing a picture. No, I'll do it later, sorry. All I'm doing here is I'm splitting up the whole time interval into smaller intervals, and for each of them I compute a new beta, which depends on the current number of susceptibles and the current number of infecteds, and that gives me a transmission rate and a recovery rate for every single interval. So if you have the picture in mind from just before, here you know that the transmission rate from one step to the next depends on the number of susceptibles and infecteds that exist at a certain time. And that's why we do the splitting up into smaller intervals here. So eventually you get an approximated Poisson likelihood that consists of the changes in S, which is the number of S's decreasing throughout the whole epidemic, and the changes in R, which is always increasing throughout the epidemic. Alexia has already introduced the birth-death model that Tanya implemented, and it was Tanya's idea to actually use that for an implementation of SIR combined with a birth-death model and based. And this is only a very simple representation of a birth-death process, which I just show in order to make clear that we're looking at a population size here, and the population increases with the birth rate and decreases with the death rate. And that's what we use to look at our infected individuals. So if I only look at this part of my trajectory now, I know that I move from n to n plus 1 with the rate beta as I, and I move back from m to m minus 1 with the rate gamma. And that's just the simple trick we're using to combine the two things. So now I do want to draw a picture. So here's my t being 0. I hope you can all see that. And this is my number of infecteds over time. If I split up the interval, I can just say, okay, I have a rate beta 0 and gamma 0 here, which depends on S0, I0, and R0 here. And then you go on like that and get to beta m, gamma m, Sm, Im, and Rm. Of course, you have to look at how do you choose your intervals, and that's what I'm struggling with right now, because in our first tests we've just kept it really simple and assumed a fixed number of intervals, and that's a little bit tricky because obviously you have many more events happening in the middle here and only a few events happening at the beginning and the end of the epidemic, and therefore I think we have to make the intervals tighter at the beginning and the end and let them be broader in the middle. Okay. So this is what we get. We'll have to get the likelihood of our genealogy and our SIR history, given the data, we'll need a prior on beta and gamma, and then the likelihood of the SIR history given those rates is given by our Poisson approximation, and the likelihood of the genealogy given the epidemiological history is given by an extension of Tanya's model, where she actually allows for rates to change in the birth-death process, which you might have noticed we do need here. And then you have the well-known likelihood of the data given the genealogy. The first test I did was to simulate 100 trajectories with equal birth and death rate for each of them, and I fix everything apart from the infection and recovery rate and try to estimate those two. And this looks pretty nice. For the infection rate I get 96 out of 100 in the 95% HPD, and for the recovery rate I get 95 out of 100, which is quite nice. However, as I just said, we have to do more tests, and I think we have to work on how to best choose the taus. There's lots of literature on tau leaping, and we'll probably we'll not get around looking at this more closely and include it. Thank you.
So, are there questions? Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. the stochastic SIR, doesn't that take care of the changing rate? Why would the absolute birth and death rates change? That was just the transmission rates, which are a function of SI and S0, I0, and R0.
We do that in order to be able to include it into base and have the.
Okay, so it's instead of a stochastic, it takes the place of the stochastic SIR.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
More questions? I guess everybody wants coffee, so if not, let's thank all the speakers of this morning. And